Welcome to the channel where history comes alive. Today we will delve into one of the most exciting and bloody eras of humanity. The era of ancient Rome, or more precisely, its eternal confrontation with the so-called barbarian peoples. The Roman legions, renowned for their discipline and engineering genius, faced many enemies: Germanic tribes, Celts, Parthians. Each of these cultures had its own unique philosophy of war and its own tools for waging it. But what exactly made Roman weapons so effective? And why did the barbarian warriors, who were often physically stronger and fiercer, ultimately lose? We will talk not only about swords and armor, but also about the Romans' systematic approach to warfare and the spontaneous but no less deadly tactics of their enemy. We will examine how technology, strategy, and even the psychology of combat influence the outcome of battles. Watch the video to the end and you will learn how one empire, relying on its innovations and strict order, was able to conquer most of the known world. Let's talk about one of the most underrated but perhaps most powerful weapons of the Roman legionary. It was not a sword or a shield, but his helmet. The gala helmet was not just protection, but a complex engineering structure. It was designed not only to withstand blows, but also to give the legionnaire maximum visibility while protecting his head, face, and neck. This was a fundamental difference from many barbarian helmets, which were often simple cones or bowls that did not protect the sides of the head. At first glance, this seems like a minor detail, but in a dense formation, where every step and every movement was synchronized, good visibility was critically important. It allowed the legionary to see the actions of his comrades, follow the centurion's commands, and react instantly to threats. The ability to see and coordinate their actions in the chaos of battle gave the Roman legions a tremendous advantage. Now imagine fighting as part of a huge machine, where each person is part of a mechanism, and your ability to see and understand what is happening around you is the key to survival and victory. The Roman gala helmet has come a long way, reflecting changes in tactics and technology. In the early Republic, simple bronze helmets were used, which only partially protected the head. Over time, Roman engineers began to develop more complex designs, such as the famous imperial Gallic helmet. It had a reinforced visor, wide cheek guards, and a neck guard that provided comprehensive protection. These elements were carefully designed to absorb the energy of blows, rather than transfer it to the warrior's head. The materials used to make helmets were also constantly improving. In the early period, bronze was used, but with the growth of the empire and the development of metallurgy, the Romans began to actively use iron and then steel. Iron helmets were stronger and lighter, allowing legionnaires to wear them longer without fatigue. An important part of the helmet was its lining, which softened blows and prevented chafing. It was made of leather, felt, or linen. This seemingly insignificant detail also made the Roman helmet more comfortable and effective. The gala helmet was not only a means of protection, but also a symbol of status and belonging to the legion. Centurions and other officers often had plumes or crests attached to their helmets, which made them more visible on the battlefield. This allowed soldiers to orient themselves and see where their commander was. Barbarian warriors also used headgear, but it was more often made of leather, animal skins, or even horns, which, although it looked intimidating, did not provide as much protection. A barbarian warrior fought for himself, and his helmet was a reflection of his individual strength. A Roman legionnaire, on the other hand, fought for the legion and for Rome, and his helmet reflected his belonging to this powerful military machine. The tactics of combat using the gala helmet were also unique. In close formation, legionaries could lower their heads, holding their shields forward. The helmet protected their heads from attacks from above, and the shields protected them from attacks from the front. This tactic allowed them to withstand a hail of arrows and javelins, and then, when the enemy was weakened, to counterattack. Ultimately, it was the combination of individual protection and collective tactics provided by the helmet that became one of the key factors in Roman victories. It was a symbol of the Roman military machine, effective, well-designed, and deadly. Now imagine that you are fighting as part of a huge machine, where each person is part of the mechanism, and your ability to see and understand what is happening around you is the key to survival and victory. What element of Roman equipment, apart from the helmet, do you think was most important for collective tactics? Write your guesses in the comments below this video. If you ask someone to name a symbol of a Roman legionnaire, they will most likely say a sword, but his real shield, the scutum, was just as important, if not more so. This large rectangular shield, curved at the sides, was a true masterpiece of Roman equipment. It was made of several layers of wood covered with leather and had a metal rim for extra strength. Its curved shape allowed it to effectively deflect blows and protect the body from arrows and javelins. But its main advantage lay in how it was used in formation. Legionnaires standing shoulder to shoulder created an impenetrable wall. They could lower their shields to form the famous turtle formation, or testudo, which protected them from attacks from above. This tactic made the Romans virtually invulnerable to ranged attacks. While barbarian warriors often used round or oval shields, which were good for individual combat, they could not create the same dense and protected formation. The Roman scutum was not just a shield, it was part of a collective defense that allowed the legion to advance no matter what. The scutum was not just a piece of wood, but a complex engineering solution. Its curved shape was not accidental. It allowed the shield to deflect blows directed at an angle, reducing their force. In addition, the curved shape made the shield more rigid and durable, which increased its resistance to piercing blows. In the center of the shield was a metal umbo, a large hemisphere that not only protected the legionnaire's hand, but could also be used as a weapon to strike. The umbo was strategically placed to assist the legionnaire in close combat. The scutum shield was also an important element of Roman tactics. In close formation, it allowed legionaries to make maximum use of their weapon, the gladius. When legionaries fought, they held the scutum in front of them and the gladius in their other hand. Thanks to the compactness of the sword and the protection provided by the shield, they could deliver quick and accurate thrusts to the enemy's vulnerable spots without leaving formation. This was a fundamental difference from the tactics of the barbarians, who using their long swords needed more space to maneuver. Barbarian warriors, although strong and fierce, often fought in disorganized crowds. Their shields were generally smaller and simpler. They were good for defense in individual combat, but could not provide the same collective protection as the scutum. When barbarians encountered Roman formations, they found themselves facing a wall of shields that seemed impenetrable. This wall was the result of coordinated work and trust between soldiers. Every legionnaire knew that his comrade standing next to him would protect him, and that his own shield was not only his own protection, but also protection for his neighbor. Thus, the scutum was not just a weapon, but a symbol of Roman military philosophy. It embodied collectivism, discipline, and engineering genius. It was the element that transformed a crowd of people into a single, invincible machine. The barbarians, although brave warriors, could not withstand this machine because they fought alone, while the Romans fought as one. Have you ever thought that sometimes the most reliable way to protect yourself is to completely trust the person next to you? Do our personal strength and weapons really mean anything without the shield that covers our comrade and without his sword that covers us? Let's talk about it right now. When talking about Roman weapons, one cannot fail to mention the gladius, a short sword that became the symbol of the Roman legion. Its length ranged from 60 to 85 centimeters, which made it ideal for close combat. Unlike the long swords used by barbarians, the gladius was designed not for slashing blows, but for stabbing. When a legionnaire, protected by a scutum, came into contact with the enemy, he could deliver a short and precise blow that was deadly. This tactic was fundamentally different from that of the barbarian warriors, who preferred long swords designed for sweeping, slashing blows. These swords were effective in individual combat, but they were useless in the dense Roman formation. A legionnaire standing in testudo had no room to swing, but his gladius was ideal for delivering a quick thrust between the enemy's shields. It was not just a difference in weapons, it was a difference in combat philosophy. The Romans acted as a single unit, like a machine, while the barbarians acted as individual warriors. The gladius was not just a sword, it was a tool for mass destruction. Its design was thought out to the smallest detail to maximize its effectiveness in close formation. The short, wide blade with a sharp tip allowed for deep, penetrating wounds that were often fatal. The sword's hilt was ergonomic and provided a secure grip, which was critical in the chaos of battle. The sword itself was relatively light, allowing the legionnaire to strike multiple blows without fatigue. The production of the gladius was standardized, which ensured its availability and ease of replacement. Roman blacksmiths could produce them in large quantities, providing weapons for all the legions. This was another advantage over barbarian armies, where each warrior often had his own unique, custom-made sword. Standardization allowed the Romans to quickly arm new units and replenish losses. Barbarian swords, such as the Celtic spada, were longer and heavier. They were designed for powerful, slashing blows that could pierce armor. But in the dense formation of the Romans, these swords were ineffective. Legionnaires standing shoulder to shoulder with their scutum gave the enemy no room to swing. A barbarian warrior attempting a slashing blow found himself at a disadvantage, as his sword would get stuck in the shields or simply fail to gain the necessary momentum. At this point, a Roman legionary could deliver a quick thrust that was lethal. The tactic of using the gladius was simple and effective. The legionnaire, covered by his scutum, would strike with his sword and then retreat, allowing his comrade to deliver the next blow. It was a constant, relentless attack that exhausted and demoralized the enemy. Unlike barbarian warriors who relied on personal valor and ferocity, the Romans relied on discipline and coordination. Their gladius was a symbol of this philosophy. It was not a sword for a lone hero, but a sword for a team member working toward a common victory. Ultimately, it was this difference in approach to warfare that made the Romans unbeatable. The Roman pilum was not just a throwing spear, but another example of engineering genius. This heavy javelin had a long, thin metal tip that was attached to the shaft with two rivets, one of which was wooden. Its weight and design allowed it to pierce enemy shields and armor. But its main feature was that after hitting the target, the wooden rivet broke and the thin shaft bent. This made the pilum unusable for reuse by the enemy, and the javelin stuck in the shield made it heavy and awkward, forcing the barbarian warrior to throw it away. Throwing the pilum was the first step in a Roman attack. Before engaging in close combat, the legionaries threw a hail of javelins. This not only inflicted damage, but also created chaos in the enemy's ranks, forcing them to throw down their shields. This was the perfect start for a follow-up attack with the gladius and scutum. Barbarian warriors also used javelins, but their javelins were simpler and did not have such an ingenious design. The pilum was a tactical weapon. Its design was carefully thought out to ensure maximum effectiveness in battle. The thin shaft of the tip, which bent upon impact, not only disabled the weapon, but also rendered the enemy's shield useless. A barbarian warrior who held his shield to protect himself from the blow suddenly found himself with a spear stuck in it. He could not pull it out, and his shield became heavy and cumbersome. At that moment, he had to either drop his shield or continue fighting while vulnerable. This tactic was part of Roman military strategy. The Romans did not rely on chance. They created situations in which the enemy was at a disadvantage. The pilum throw was one such moment. It not only inflicted damage but also demoralized the enemy, who saw that their defense was useless. Barbarian warriors, relying on their shields and personal strength, found themselves at an impasse. Their tactics, based on a powerful onslaught, were destroyed before they even began. The difference between the pilum and barbarian javelins was enormous. Barbarian javelins were simple spears that could be used for throwing. They were light and fast, but did not have the destructive power of the pilum. They could inflict damage, but they could not disable the enemy's defenses. The Romans, on the other hand, created a weapon that was specifically designed to combat barbarian tactics. This was further evidence that the Romans approached war not as a duel, but as a strategic game. The pilum was a symbol of Roman pragmatism. The Romans were not afraid to create disposable weapons if they were effective. They understood that a single well-thrown group of javelins could decide the outcome of a battle. Ultimately, it was this ability to adapt and innovate that allowed the Romans to surpass their opponents. Their weapons were not just a set of tools, but part of a well-thought-out and interconnected system. Now imagine that you are a warrior with a barbarian longsword, and 1,000 Romans are rushing at you with heavy javelins. What would you do? Would you run to the nearest tree? Or maybe just hide behind your shield? Let's talk about it further. Now let's talk about barbarian arsenals. Germanic tribes, Celts, Gauls. They all preferred weapons that suited their fighting style: individual, fierce, and straightforward. Their long swords, such as the Celtic spatha, were ideal for slashing blows that could inflict serious injuries. They were designed for fighting in open fields, where warriors had enough space to maneuver. Their shields were usually round or oval, and although they were sturdy, they did not provide the same collective protection as the Roman scutum. Axes and spears were also popular weapons. The Germanic Francisca, a throwing axe, was effective at short ranges. Celtic spears, often with broad tips, were formidable weapons in the hands of a skilled warrior. However, the barbarians did not have the standardization and mass production that the Romans had. Their weapons were often unique, created for a specific person. While the Roman legion was uniformly armed, the barbarian army was a collection of individuals, which ultimately affected its effectiveness against the Roman war machine. Barbarian warriors, relying on their physical strength and ferocity, often went into battle with minimal or no armor. Their defense consisted of large round shields, often decorated with bright patterns. These shields were effective in individual combat, allowing the warrior to parry blows and launch counterattacks. However, unlike the Roman scutum, they could not be combined into a dense formation capable of withstanding the onslaught of an entire legion. Their tactic was a swift, furious attack, which, if it did not lead to quick success, often ended in disaster. A long sword, such as the Celtic spatha, was ideal for such tactics. It allowed powerful slashing blows that could inflict serious wounds. But in the dense Roman formation, where each legionary was protected by a scutum and larica segmentata, the spatha proved ineffective. To strike, a barbarian warrior needed space to swing, which he did not have. The Roman gladius, on the other hand, was designed for short, stabbing blows, which were ideal for close combat. The Francisca throwing axe was another example of a barbarian weapon that was effective in certain conditions. It could inflict damage at close range and even pierce light armor. But like long swords, it was a weapon designed for individual warriors, not for a mass army. Barbarians often used bows and arrows, but their bows were simpler and did not have the range and penetrating power of Roman ones. Ultimately, the difference between Roman and barbarian weapons was not in their quality, but in their philosophy. Barbarian weapons reflected their individualistic approach to warfare, where every warrior was a hero. Roman weapons, on the other hand, reflected their collectivist approach, where each warrior was part of a machine. It was a clash of two different worlds, and ultimately, the world of organization and discipline defeated the world of individualism and fury. The most important difference between Roman and barbarian weapons was not in their quality or strength, but in how they were used. The Roman army was a model of organization. Every legionnaire knew his role, and every unit worked as a single entity. Their weapons were designed to work as a team. The long pilum weakened the enemy, the scutum created an impenetrable wall, and the short gladius finished off the enemy in close combat. It was the perfect combination for collective warfare. Barbarian armies, on the other hand, relied on personal valor and fury. Their tactics often consisted of a powerful but disorganized onslaught. They relied on individual skill rather than coordinated formations. Their weapons, although deadly, could not compare to the Roman system, where each element worked toward a common victory. The Roman military machine was not just an army, but a complex system. Each legionnaire underwent rigorous training, which included not only weapon proficiency, but also the ability to act in formation. They learned to march long distances, build camps, and coordinate their actions with other units. This discipline and organization were the key to their victories. Legionnaires knew that their strength lay in unity and that their personal safety depended on how well they worked together. This was a fundamental difference from barbarian warriors, who fought as lone heroes, relying on their strength and ferocity. The barbarians, though brave warriors, often lacked the same level of training. Their tactics were based on a powerful onslaught, which, if it did not lead to quick success, often ended in disaster. When their onslaught met with a dense Roman formation, they found themselves at an impasse. Their longswords were ineffective, their shields could not withstand a hail of pilums, and their disorganized attack was broken against a wall of Roman shields. It was a clash of two different approaches to warfare: chaos versus order, fury versus discipline. Roman organization was not only at the tactical level, but also at the logistical level. The Romans built roads, bridges, and fortified camps that allowed them to move troops quickly and provide them with everything they needed. They had a well-established supply system that allowed them to sustain long campaigns. The barbarians, on the other hand, often suffered from a lack of food and equipment. Their armies were temporary, assembled for a specific purpose, and could not sustain long wars. Thus, Rome's victory over the barbarians was not only a victory of weapons, but also a victory of the system. The Romans understood that war was not only about strength and courage, but also about logistics, organization, and discipline. They created a military machine that was so effective that it could defeat even numerically superior opponents. This machine was based on simple principles, which, however, enabled them to conquer most of the known world. Now imagine that you are standing in the dense ranks of Roman legionnaires, and 1,000 fierce barbarians are rushing towards you. What quality, apart from its strength, will help you survive? Keep watching the video to find out the answer to this question. Barbarian warriors were often physically stronger than Roman legionnaires, but this advantage did not always bring them victory. Roman weapons were not designed to win duels, but to win wars. The short gladius was not the longest sword, but in close formation, where every inch counted, its effectiveness was unmatched. The pilum was not the most powerful spear, but its ability to disable enemy shields was invaluable. Roman weapons were the result of years of evolution, where each element was designed and optimized for a specific purpose. While the barbarians relied on personal strength and courage, the Romans relied on technology and logic. It was not just a clash of cultures, it was a clash of two different approaches to warfare. One based on individuality and spontaneity, the other on organization and rationality. Ultimately, the latter proved to be more effective. The Romans realized that in large-scale conflicts, where it is not the strength of a single warrior that is decisive, but the coordination of the entire army, efficiency surpasses brute force. Their weapons were a reflection of this philosophy. The gladius, short and deadly in close combat, was ideal for use in dense formations, where there was simply no room to swing a longsword. A legionnaire, delivering quick, stabbing blows from behind his large shield, could neutralize an opponent before they had a chance to strike. It was a battle not of strength, but of speed and accuracy. Barbarian warriors relying on their longswords often had the advantage in individual combat, but this advantage was lost when they faced the Roman formation. The Roman legions, standing as a wall of shields, were virtually invulnerable to their sweeping attacks. The barbarians could deliver powerful blows, but they simply could not break through this wall. At this time, Roman legionaries, using their gladius, could deliver quick and deadly blows that destroyed the enemy's formation. The pilum is another example of Roman efficiency. It was a disposable weapon designed for one purpose: to disable the enemy's shield. A barbarian warrior who encountered a pilum found himself in a hopeless situation. He could not pull it out, and his shield became useless. This tactic had nothing to do with fair combat. It was designed to create chaos and confusion in the enemy's ranks before engaging in close combat. Thus, Roman weapons were not just a set of tools, but part of a well-thought-out and interconnected system, where each element worked towards the overall victory. It was a clash of two different worlds, a world that valued individualism and ferocity, and a world that valued organization and logic. Ultimately, it was the latter that allowed the Romans to conquer most of the known world. Moreover, Roman weapons were cost-effective. Standardization of production reduced manufacturing and maintenance costs. Roman armories operated like modern factories, producing thousands of swords, shields, and armor. This allowed Rome to maintain a huge army and quickly replenish its losses. At the same time, barbarian warriors often made their own weapons or bought them from blacksmiths. Their weapons were more unique and often had symbolic meaning, but they were more expensive and more difficult to replace. The Romans also paid great attention to training. Each legionnaire underwent rigorous training, which included not only weapon proficiency, but also the ability to work in formation. They learned to move and fight as a single unit, which gave them a huge advantage over the disorganized crowds of barbarians. This discipline and organization, combined with effective weapons, became the key to their victories. The Roman army was predominantly infantry, but they also had cavalry, which played a supporting role. Roman horsemen, although not as famous as their infantry counterparts, used spears, swords, and shields adapted for fighting on horseback. Their weapons were lighter and shorter than those of the infantry. However, the cavalry often played a decisive role for the barbarians. The Parthian cataphracts, heavy cavalry protected by steel armor, were a real problem for the Romans. They used long spears and bows that could inflict damage from a great distance. Barbarian cavalry often surpassed the Roman cavalry in maneuverability and firepower, but the Romans found a way to counter them using their famous infantry tactics. They could form dense formations that were virtually impenetrable to cavalry. This showed that the Romans were able to adapt their tactics to any opponent, even if their weapons were more advanced. The Roman cavalry, or equites, although not a striking force like that of the barbarians, played an important role in reconnaissance, pursuing retreating enemies and protecting the flanks. Their weapons were adapted for combat on horseback. The spatha, a longer sword than the gladius, which was convenient for slashing blows from horseback, and small round shields that did not interfere with the rider's maneuverability. Unlike the heavy barbarian cavalry, Roman horsemen were lighter, which allowed them to be more maneuverable but less protected. Barbarian horsemen, such as the Sarmatians or Parthians, were masters of fighting on horseback. Their cataphracts, or heavy cavalry, were clad in armor, as were their horses. They used long spears that could pierce several men with a single blow, as well as composite bows that were deadly at a distance. Their tactics consisted of powerful, crushing attacks that could break through enemy formations. However, the Romans found a way to counter this. At the Battle of Carrhae, where the Roman legions clashed with the Parthian cavalry, they suffered heavy losses, but they learned from this defeat. They began to use their infantry to counter the cavalry. Roman legionaries could form dense formations that were virtually impenetrable to cavalry attacks. They could use their pilum to disable horses and riders, and then engage in close combat with their gladius. This was further evidence that the Romans knew how to adapt their tactics. They realized that their infantry was their greatest strength, and they learned to use it to counter any opponent. Even when barbarian cavalry had superior weapons, the Romans could win by using their discipline, organization, and tactics. Thus, the confrontation between Rome and the barbarians was not only a clash of weapons, but also a clash of tactics, where Roman flexibility and adaptability proved decisive. After their defeat by the Parthians at Carrhae in 53 BC, Roman commanders such as Mark Antony and later the emperors Augustus and Tiberius began to pay more attention to tactics for countering cavalry. They developed new formations that could withstand the onslaught of even the most powerful cavalry. Legionnaires trained to withstand the onslaught of horsemen, using their shields and spears to form a hedgehog. This tactic was particularly effective against heavy cavalry, which, although powerful, could not maneuver in close formation. The Romans also understood the importance of light infantry, which could work together with the cavalry. These units, armed with javelins and bows, could fire on the barbarian cavalry, inflicting damage and forcing them to retreat. This was a fundamental change in Roman military strategy, which had previously relied exclusively on heavy infantry. The Romans were pragmatic strategists, and they were not afraid to learn from their mistakes. They adapted their tactics and equipment to meet the challenges posed by the barbarians. Ultimately, it was this ability to adapt and be flexible that was the key to their success. The Roman army was not just a military machine, but a living organism that could learn, evolve, and adapt to any conditions. Barbarian armies, on the other hand, were more static in their tactics and weaponry. They relied on tradition and personal valor, which often led to their defeat against the Romans, who always found a way to win using their discipline and intelligence. Thus, the confrontation between Rome and the barbarians was not only a clash of arms, but also a clash of minds where Roman flexibility and adaptability proved decisive. Barbarian warriors, especially the Celts, often fought with minimal armor, relying on their large shields. Roman legionaries, on the other hand, were protected by heavy armor. Lorica segmentata, segmented armor consisting of metal plates, was very durable and flexible. It provided excellent protection against the slashing blows that were characteristic of barbarian swords. This armor was another example of Roman engineering. It was relatively light for its strength and could be quickly assembled or disassembled for repair. Barbarian warriors, although they could be dressed in chainmail, often preferred to move without heavy armor. This gave them an advantage in speed and maneuverability. But in close formation, when a hail of javelins rained down on them, the lack of armor made them very vulnerable. The Roman legion, protected by the scutum and larica segmentata, could withstand attacks that would have simply destroyed a barbarian army. The larica segmentata, which appeared in the early empire, was the pinnacle of Roman protective equipment. It consisted of multiple horizontal strips of steel connected by leather straps and fasteners. This design allowed the armor to be flexible enough for the warrior to move, but at the same time provided excellent protection. This was a fundamental difference from chainmail, which, although flexible, could not withstand a powerful slashing blow as well as metal plates. Lorica segmentata was specifically designed to protect against the long swords and axes used by barbarians. Barbarian armor was diverse. Some tribes used leather or cloth armor, while others used chainmail, which was very expensive and only available to the elite. However, most warriors relied on their shields and courage. Their tactics, based on a quick and fierce attack, required speed and maneuverability. Heavy armor would have slowed them down, so they preferred to do without it. This was their main advantage, but it also became their weakness. When a barbarian army faced a Roman legion, it found itself at a disadvantage. Roman legionaries, protected by lorica segmentata and scutum, could withstand a hail of arrows and javelins and then engage in close combat. At that point, their heavy armor gave them a huge advantage. Barbarian warriors, deprived of such protection, were very vulnerable. Their slashing blows against Roman armor were ineffective, while the Roman gladius, delivering stabbing blows, easily found vulnerable spots in their light armor or lack thereof. This difference in approach to defense was further evidence that the Romans approached warfare systematically. They understood that individual strength could not compare to collective defense. Their armor was part of their tactics, which were aimed at minimizing losses and maximizing effectiveness. The barbarians, on the other hand, relied on their personal valor, which often led to their defeat. Ultimately, it was this difference in approach that allowed the Romans to conquer most of the known world. Another advantage of Roman weapons was their mass production and standardization. Roman legions could produce and repair their weapons in huge quantities. Each legionnaire's weapon was identical, which simplified training and maintenance. If a sword broke, it could be replaced without any problems. Barbarian warriors, as a rule, did not have such luxury. Their weapons were often unique, and repairing them could be a difficult task. This meant that a barbarian army could not sustain long campaigns as effectively as the Roman legions. The Romans, with their well-established system of production and logistics, could provide their soldiers with everything they needed, which gave them a huge advantage in long-term warfare. The Roman Empire, being a giant state, understood perfectly well that an army is strong not only on the battlefield, but also in the rear. The system of weapon production and maintenance was so well organized that it resembled a modern conveyor belt. Armories, or fabrica, were located not only in Rome, but also in the provinces, which made it possible to quickly and efficiently supply legions on distant borders. The standardization of Roman weapons was of great importance. Every gladius, every pilum, every scutum was manufactured according to a single model. This allowed legionaries to easily master new weapons and quickly replace damaged or lost equipment. If necessary, a legionary could take a weapon from a fallen comrade and continue fighting. This was a fundamental difference from barbarian armies, where each warrior had his own unique weapon, often custom-made. If a barbarian's sword broke, he could find himself in a hopeless situation. A Roman legionnaire always knew that he would have a spare weapon at hand. The logistics system was also part of the Roman military machine. The Romans built famous roads that allowed them to quickly move troops and supplies. They created fortified camps where soldiers could rest, repair their equipment, and replenish their supplies. All of this was part of a well-thought-out system that allowed Roman legions to wage long campaigns far from home. Barbarian armies, on the other hand, were less mobile. They often depended on their own supplies, which ran out quickly. This meant that they could not withstand long sieges or campaigns and often had to retreat. Thus, Rome's victory over the barbarians was not only a victory of weapons, but also a victory of logistics and organization. The Romans understood that war was not only about strength and courage, but also about the ability to support an army. They created a system that was so effective that it could defeat even numerically superior opponents. This system was based on simple principles: standardization, mass production, and well-organized logistics. This was further proof that the Roman Empire was not just a military power, but an engineering and organizational marvel. So we have seen that the confrontation between Rome and the barbarians was not just a battle of strength, but a clash between two different cultures and philosophies. The Romans won not because their soldiers were stronger, but because their system was more effective. Their weapons were part of a well-thought-out tactic, not just individual tools. It was a victory of organization over fury, of technology over strength. The Roman galae provided visibility, the scutum provided collective protection, and the gladius and pilum were the perfect combination for inflicting damage in close formation. Ultimately, it was this systematic approach, backed by powerful logistics and weapon standardization, that was the key to their victories. Barbarian warriors, although possessing individual valor and courage, could not withstand this military machine. Their weapons, designed for personal combat, were ineffective against the Roman legions, which worked as a single organism. It was a clash of two different approaches to warfare, and in the end, Roman discipline and engineering genius prevailed. What other historical topics would you like us to explore? For example, the history of the Vikings or samurai culture. Write your suggestions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.